Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Fiancé's Return. Chapter 1. Smoke curled around Marin, and the smell of alcohol and filth was pungent in her nostrils. Fear made her stomach weak. She'd made a terrible mistake, and now there was no one to help her. She was cold and tired. The days of travel and her captor's constant badgering had made her weak. They had denied her food, trying to force her compliance, but Marin wasn't going to give in so easily. Now, they were starving her. Day in and day out, she was allowed to smell the meals being prepared, but never to taste them. The show's boss, Felix Roberts, had come to her with his bowl full and offered her a morsel if she'd promise not to run away again. She'd slapped the bowl and its contents into his face, which was why he had bound her hands. Her wrists were sore and the faintest hint of iron in the air let her know she'd rubbed them raw in her effort to escape. Marin rested her head on the pole that propped up the center of the tent in which she was being kept. The wood was old and half-rotten, but still strong enough to hold her in her current state. She was bound in front, a welcome reprieve. Initially, her arms had been bound behind her back, nearly injuring her shoulder. Felix ordered the bindings changed when he realized he might permanently damage his new acquisition. The irony of it all was that her sister Elise had taken Marin and fled New York to save her from the attention of this very type of man. Her sister had been right all along. Marin couldn't look after herself. All of this disaster was her own fault. She'd allowed herself to be babied her entire life, and now she had been trapped by her own naivety. Dirt flew at her face as a large boot kicked the ground in her direction. "Get up," a gruff voice bellowed. The voice was now horribly familiar. Marin opened her eyes to look upon the face that had tormented her for days. Felix was a tall man, the size of an oak tree, with a neck as thick as one of its limbs. He was also a formidable man with a temperament that made him terrifying. His words were harsh, even to those he called comrades, and his tongue was as foul as a trough of slop after a heavy rain. His sharp blue eyes trapped her in their gaze and made her shiver. The sight was like looking on ice. There was no warmth or life in the shallow depths, nor was there any way to tell the lengths a man like him might go. "There you are," he snarled as he stooped before her. "Haven't you had enough by now? Don't you want to take me up on my offer? I've been more than patient with you, but it's starting to wear thin." Marin swallowed the lump that formed in her throat. "I won't do it," she answered, her voice so low it could almost go unheard against the din outside. The laugh that issued from Felix's lips made her blood run cold. "Who do you think you are? You came to me. You asked me for work and I took you in, now you say you won't do what I'm askin?" His scarred face came closer, the bristles of his long beard scratching at her cheek. "And you think I'll let you get away with this? No woman denies me. One way or another, you're going to do what I tell you, but it'll be easier if you do it willingly." Her insides churned, and Marin would have vomited at his threat if there had been anything in her stomach. "Please let me go. I won't say anything. I'll be no trouble. I just want to go home," she pleaded as tears stung her eyes. "You are home." Felix smirked. "You best get used to it." "I want to go home," she continued to protest as a feeling she couldn't describe stirred inside her. "Shut your hole. You ain't going anywhere," Felix countered as he slapped a large hand against the pole which held her captive. Marin should have been afraid. She should have kept her peace, but something inside her wouldn't allow it. The geyser inside her erupted and there was no stopping it, for brazen fear had taken hold of her senses. "I won't do it. I won't. I want to go home. You let me out. You let me out of here," she began to scream as she kicked her legs. She tried to get him with her right foot but missed. The next thing she knew, something solid swung through the air and snapped her head back as it connected with her cheek. "Wench! "I'll teach you to throw your foot at me," Felix bellowed as he snatched her up by the hair and dragged her to her feet. Maren yelped in pain at the force as her injured wrists were dragged along the splintered surface of the pole. She stopped at the sight of something glinting in the light of the fire filtering through the flap. A knife. Her breath caught in her throat, and her senses returned to her in a rush as Felix brought the glistening blade to her face and held it against her cheek. "I told you. One way or another." His mouth pressed against her ear. "You had to choose the hard way." A moment later, her hands were freed as the blade slipped between the pole and the rope, dividing it effortlessly. Then she was being shoved with a force so great she lost her footing and fell to the dirt, a cloud rising and filling her mouth as she began to sputter. "Get up!" Felix yelled. "Time for you to learn who's the boss round here." His boot connected solidly with her back when she tried to stand and sent her flying to the earth once more. She wanted to cry, but she held it in. She wasn't going to allow him the satisfaction of her tears. He'd probably only enjoy his torment more if he knew how deeply she feared him and what was to come. He shoved her toward the open flap in the tent, causing her to fall over and over before she finally stumbled out. She was able to get her footing then, but only for a moment, before Felix shoved her forward, urging her to move faster. She faltered but somehow managed to remain upright. "Get moving," he ordered. "What's going on, Felix?" one of the other men asked as they neared the fire that marked the center of the camp. Felix sniggered. "She needs a lesson in manners," he answered. The other man's eyes washed over Maren in a way that made her skin crawl. He licked his lips and smiled, revealing darkened teeth. "Need help in her instruction? You feelin' for a lesson, Briggs?" Felix hissed. "Ain't often we get someone the likes of her round here," he answered. Maren's head was yanked backward as Felix once more grabbed her by the hair. "You know, you're right. She is a pretty little thing, ain't she?" "She'll bring big bucks," Briggs answered. He was now on his feet, the spot by the fire forgotten as he moved toward them. "All right then," Felix answered. "Over there in that thick of trees," he continued, pointing the blade of the knife towards a patch of thick brush with a few tall trees interspersed amongst it. Then they were moving again. Maren could no longer hold in her tears as they drew closer and closer to the spot assigned for her lesson. She tried not to hear the comments of the men that followed her. Thoughts of running filled her head, but they were all useless. She was too weak to run, and they were too strong to allow her to get far. There seemed no escape from the fate that awaited her. "Lord, take my life rather than let me meet defilement at their hands. I haven't asked you for anything lately. Today I do. Don't let this happen or don't let me live. Please don't let Elise blame herself for my mistakes. Watch over my sister and let her be happy." Maren prayed with open eyes as the trees loomed before her. They rustled as she neared them. The sickening fear in her stomach and the onslaught of tears saw her doubled over as she crossed from the clearing into the brush. The sound of malicious laughter filled her ears as she was told to stop a few feet in. She wrapped her arms around herself and closed her eyes as the sound of heavy footfalls edged nearer. "Lord, save me." Chapter 2. Sweat soaked the sheets as Maren jumped from her sleep, arms flailing against invisible hands. Her chest heaved, and her heart beat so hard she felt as if it would erupt from her chest at any moment. They weren't there. They'd failed. She was safe. Maren forced the memory of her captors away and focused on the memory of her rescuers. She recalled how Hamilton and his brothers had arrived in time to save her from a horrific fate. How they had brought Felix and Briggs to heel and had whisked her away from that horrible camp before anyone had been wiser. She'd been lucky, but the girls who remained had not been. How many had suffered their lessons? How many had been robbed of their innocence for the lusts of flesh and gain? Tears rolled down her cheeks and dampened the cinnamon hair that fell over her shoulder as she sat up in her darkened room. Her eyes darted around her until they adjusted, still looking for those menacing faces, haunted by the sounds of their voices whispering their intentions. "Mary?" Elise's voice sounded suddenly, and the door to her room was flung open, the light from below filtering in. The sight of her sister's face brought the tears coursing from her eyes. Though it had been months since her ordeal, every second of it lived on inside her head, and every night she returned to some part of it. "I was passing to our room when I heard you scream," Elise stated as she came to sit by her bedside, brushing Marin's hair from her forehead maternally. "I'm sorry," Marin apologized. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "Don't be silly," Elise answered, as she pushed away the hair that stuck to her cheek. "I just came up to get something. Hamilton and I were downstairs talking about lunch this coming Sunday." "We're still having everyone over?" Marin asked in order to distract herself. Her breath remained quick and her heart was still galloping in her chest. "Yes. We were trying to decide what to serve so he could pick a few things when he goes into town tomorrow," her sister answered with a smile. The way Elise looked at her was so full of love and concern, it was painful to see. Her sister still saw her as the child she no longer was. Marin wished she could be young again, but there was no going back. There was only pressing forward. "Is he going into town?" Marin asked as her pulse finally began to slow. She folded her hands together and tried her best to look composed, trying to alleviate her sister's worry. Elise was keenly aware of what Marin had suffered after she'd run away, and how her departure had almost caused her to lose the only family she had left. Selfish. The word echoed in Marin's head and snapped like a whip against her heart. How could she have done what she did? She should have known better. She should have stayed put or at least told her sister of her intentions. If she had, things may have been different. "Your fault." Her eyes fell on the quilt that warmed her bed. Hialeah had made it for her when she returned, and the pair had been introduced. Marin was shocked to find out that her family had grown since she left, and when Elise and Hamilton had wed, suddenly she had a much larger extended family than she could have ever dreamed of. Still, she felt out of place. Elise had formed bonds in her absence, but while Marin was gone, all she'd had was herself and her prayers. Her safe return was one of the first times God had ever answered her that she recollected. Still, there was the guilt and the loneliness as Marin watched her sister happy in her new marriage with her new family, leaving her on the periphery. Elise did everything she could to include her, but Marin couldn't find it within herself to be who she used to be. The carefree girl who had set her foot outside the borders of Hidden Creek had landed her carelessly into danger and had changed her. "Yes, he's going into town first thing in the morning," Elise answered. "Can I go with him?" The surprise on her sister's face was evident as they looked at each other before Elise lit the lamp by her bedside. "Are you sure?" her sister questioned. Marin nodded. "It's been weeks since I left the house, and besides, I'd like to get some fabric to make something nice for Hialeah. I haven't been able to thank your sister-in-law properly for the quilt she made for me." "Mary, Hialeah isn't looking for you to reciprocate. She did it out of kindness, not to get something out of it," Elise answered. "I know. I just want to do something nice for her. I don't really know her or Simeon. Maybe this will help. Should I make something for the baby?" Elise looked at her thoughtfully. "Before, things like that would have made you smile to even think of them," she said gently as her hand reached up to touch Marin's cheek. "You don't smile anymore." "I'm sorry," Marin answered as her eyes fell from her sister's face. "It's not an accusation," Elise replied. "Just an observation." Marin noted the subtle crack in her sister's voice. "Don't cry. Please don't," Marin pleaded as her eyes rose quickly to Elise's face. "I can't bear to see you cry over me any longer. I can't help it. I almost lost you, Mary, and I can't even begin to imagine what happened to you while you were gone. How horrible it must have been for you, and I wasn't there to help. It wasn't your fault, Elise. I'm the one who left. Don't blame yourself for my actions. You have to stop taking responsibility for me. I'm grown. I make my own decisions, and it was me who got myself into the mess. Not you. But I promised to protect you," Elise countered. "You can't." Her words seemed to hit her sister like a slap, so shocked did she look. "I'm not a baby anymore, Elise, or a little child holding on to your skirt to lead me. I'm not your responsibility. I have to learn to stand on my own 2 feet and not make myself a burden to anyone. Why would you say such a thing? Elise interrupted. You could never be a burden. I say I am. Mary. Listen to me. Stop blaming yourself. You and Hamilton have a life to live. A happy life, Elise, and I'm so pleased that you found a good man to love you. But you can't keep your eyes on me every second of every day, and you can't keep seeing me as the only one who needs you. You have a husband now, and who knows how soon before you have a family to add to that. You are my family, too. I know, but I'm not your burden. She sniffled. I don't want you hovering over me. I don't want you worrying about me every second of every day. I know you do, so don't deny it. How can I not? Elise continued. You're my baby sister. Maren sighed. That's just it. I'm not. I'm not your baby sister. You have to let me go. I can't be the woman I'm meant to be if all I know are eyes that see me as a child. What do you mean? Elise asked, panic rising in her voice. Are you planning on leaving again? No, Maren answered as she gripped her sister's arms to calm her. I'm not leaving, but I do need to find my own way. I like it here and I want to make a life here, but I can't keep being someone's responsibility. I can't keep relying on other people to take care of me. Not even you. Maybe that will help me find my way back to who I used to be. Or who I'm meant to be. Maybe focusing on my future will help me get over the past. Maren's words were almost a plea, asking Elise, or maybe God, for permission to move forward. It had been weeks and the lingering fears and dreams were weighing on her. She wanted to go back and redo things, but she realized now the only thing she could was to move forward. Elise reached up and squeezed her hand gently. I understand, she answered and pulled her close. I won't say it doesn't scare me. I have cared for you and been there for you, your entire life. I don't know how not to. You have to learn. We both do. Maren sighed, glad for the hug and even more glad for her sister's understanding. I want what's best for you, Mary, Elise said with a sniff. I want the same for you, Maren answered. It's time we both moved forward. Chapter 3. The wagon was packed and Maren was seated on the bench waiting for Hamilton. Her brother-in-law had prepared everything for their trip into town, but at the last minute had been called aside by Billy, the new hand they had hired shortly after Maren's return. I don't know how that could have happened, Hamilton commented as he rounded the corner of the house and approached the wagon. I don't know either, but I don't feel it's by accident, Billy answered as he walked in stride beside Hamilton. Billy Murdoch was 22 and handsome. He had dark brown hair and black eyes that lit up every time he saw Maren. Still, Maren couldn't find it within her to reciprocate his overtures. Good morning, Miss Maren, Billy said as he removed his hat and gave her a friendly nod of acknowledgement. Good morning, Billy, she answered. Are you joining us on the ride to town? Yes, ma'am. The boss needs some help. Hold your horses there. I don't need help. I told you that Maren and I were going to town, and you were welcome to join us, Hamilton asserted as he hoisted himself into the seat beside Maren. Billy's cheeks reddened. Yeah, well, you still might need help, he answered as he took a few long strides and then bounded into the bed of the wagon. Always best to have help and don't need it, than need it and there isn't any to be found. Isn't that right, Miss Maren? Maren nodded and turned her head, hoping she wasn't appearing too rude. She appreciated Billy's enthusiasm about life, and usually, she tolerated him perfectly well, but not today. Today, his infectiously positive demeanor was nothing short of a nuisance to her. She didn't want to have to pretend to be cheerful. She wasn't, and she didn't know when she would be again. She was tired of facades. You both have some fun, Elise called from the porch as she waved in their direction. Maren gave her a small returning wave. Hopefully, Maren will, Hamilton called back. It's all business for me. We'll be back before supper. His gentle tone and the lilt in his voice echoed the affection between them. It was strange how quickly things could change. How two seemingly opposite people could find one another. Maybe one day, it would be Marin's turn. But in the meantime, she was content to see Elise happy. Her eyes turned to her brother-in-law. Marin hadn't thought Hamilton possessed a kind bone in his body when she'd first met him, and the months that followed had done nothing to convince her otherwise. She was almost frightened of him the night he and his brothers appeared in the darkness to save her. Then everything had changed, and she saw a side of him she could never have imagined existed, his tender heart. Her sister was good for him, there was no denying that. Elise kept him humble, and his passion kept her peaceful, and their mutual faith kept them grounded. Hamilton was still working on unlearning the harsh, unreasonable lessons his father had taught him as a child, but with her sister's help, he was making progress. He'd even started calling Hialeah by her name, which was a lot considering the history the two shared. Marin was glad for it, yet somehow, it almost made her feel as if she were even more on the outskirts as the members of their new family began to grow closer. It felt as if they were squeezing her out, though she knew better. The problem was with her and no one else. If she wanted things to change, then she was going to have to take the steps to make change happen. "I'm glad you decided to join me today," Hamilton said suddenly, causing her to start. "Thank you for letting me come along. I know you have a lot to do. I promise I won't get in the way or get into any trouble." Hamilton chuckled. "Marin, believe me, you won't get in the way, and you certainly aren't any trouble." She stared at his face, searching his features, wondering if what he said was true. How could he say that, given all that had happened? How could he call her no trouble when all she'd ever brought him was difficulties? He must have sensed her feelings as he replied quickly after. "I mean that. You are no trouble to me. I'm glad to have you in the family." Elise must have said something to him. There was no other explanation for his behavior. Her ever-worrying sister was probably trying to ensure that Marin felt as at home and as welcomed as possible among them so she wouldn't try to fly the coop again. It wasn't necessary. There was no way anyone could ever get Marin to leave Hidden Creek again. Not for any reason. She gave Hamilton a smile and turned her head, focusing her eyes on the road ahead. The ride into town seemed to fly by, mostly because Marin's thoughts had filled her mind so thoroughly that she barely noticed anyone or anything around her. Once there, Billy assisted her from the wagon before the trio proceeded about their business. Hamilton and Billy talked with one another as she trailed behind them. Their first stop was the feed store to collect grain for the animals. Marin was little occupied with her brother-in-law or his ranch hand. Her eyes were busy noticing the ones that peered back at her. One woman who passed her, stared openly and then began to whisper to the woman who walked beside her. She, too, turned to look in Marin's direction. "You don't have to come along if you don't want to," Hamilton interjected as he hoisted a bag of grain onto his broad shoulders. "Elise said you had some things of your own you wanted to get." "Yes. I just thought you might want me to stay close by." "Don't be silly. Go do what you need to do." "I can manage just fine," Hamilton answered as he hoisted another bag onto his shoulders. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Go deal with your business. I'll find you if you aren't back by the wagon when I'm ready to go." Marin felt a strange sense of relief wash over her as Hamilton released her to go about her way. It was the first time in months that the sense of claustrophobia she'd been experiencing finally seemed to lift. She nodded. "I'm just going to the haberdashery and maybe to the bakery." "Enjoy yourself," Hamilton replied and flashed her a smile before he turned in the direction of the wagon, a large bag balancing on each shoulder as he walked. Marin didn't hesitate longer. She turned on her heel and began walking to her destination. She strolled along the walkway, gazing into the windows she passed, looking for anything interesting. Nothing grabbed her. It was as if her life had become shades of gray where once there had been so many colors. The girl she was had gone, and she wasn't sure who she was now. The sound of boots bounding behind her filled her ears, but Marin didn't acknowledge them. It wasn't until Billy appeared at her side that she stopped. "Billy, you startled me," she said curtly. "I told Hamilton I'd accompany you," he answered, his hat once again folded in his hands and resting in front of him. "I didn't ask for an escort," she replied quickly. "Never said you did," he answered with equal rapidity. "I said I offered." She stared at him suspiciously. What do you want? The bluntness of her question seemed to take him by surprise, and he delayed in his response. Finally, he mustered an answer. I like you. I want to get to know you. It was Marin's turn to be stunned. Hadn't he heard what had happened to her? She knew everyone was still talking. She was pure in that respect, and she hadn't done anything to shame herself or her family, no matter what anyone thought. Though the earlier looks let her know that others believed contrary. I'm not interested in you, she answered, feeling only slightly bad about her frankness. Billy's features never wavered, despite the harshness of her response. I know you aren't, he answered. I said I was. So I'm making it my mission to make you like me. She huffed. She didn't need his foolishness. Billy, she started but was quickly interrupted. Don't bother telling me I shouldn't. If you knew me better, you'd know I am the most determined person you'll ever meet, he said with a smile. And the nicest, he added with waggling eyebrows. Don't ask me. Ask anyone. I don't want to ask anyone, she retorted. I just want to walk by myself. All right then, he answered and took 2 steps back. What are you doing? This way I'm not walking with you. I'm walking behind you, he mused. Marin stifled a groan and marched to her destination. Chapter 4. Billy had grown on her. In the weeks since their visit to town, the young man had shown no end to his attention. He was there whenever Marin needed anything, and he took every opportunity he could get to speak to her, even when she tried to ignore him. Today had been no different. She woke early to help her sister in the garden. Their enlarged patch of vegetables for the house was doing well. It was a project Marin had initiated after seeing the bill for the items they had purchased for their Sunday meal with the Barber family. The garden had been a success in everyone's eyes, but to Marin it was a reminder of how she didn't yet have a family of her own. She had spent the evening watching the family units interact. Hamilton took every chance he could to put his arm around Ailey's, while Simeon and Hialeah were occupied with their new son, Benjamin. Gwen and James had their hands full with their 2 girls, Miriam and Elizabeth. They were all so happy and settled in their places in life, and Marin was anything but. She didn't know where she was or where she was going. If she were honest, she felt very little since her return to Hidden Creek, though every day she hoped that she would revert to her old self and that a flicker of life would once again ignite inside her. In the interim, it was just easier to distance herself, which was why Billy was proving a difficulty to her plan. Will you please go back to the house? She asked exasperatedly. Not until you do, Billy answered. It isn't safe to be walking out here on your own. I'll be just fine. I've done it plenty of times. Yes, but that was before I was around to escort you. Now that I am here, I aim to keep careful watch, he answered frankly. Marin turned on him with aggravation, her small fists balled at her sides. Did I tell you I needed protection? Did I even ask you to keep me company? No, he said with a grin. I offered my services. Free of charge, I might add, he added with a wink. Billy. What is your last name? She asked, realizing she didn't know it. It's Jones, he answered bemused. You really don't notice much, do you? What does that mean? I mean, you're always walking around with your head down, and you aren't noticing anything around you is all. The ire that had been building up inside her was suddenly squelched by Billy's keen observation. You noticed? He smiled. I notice everything about you. You can't seem to notice I'm trying to avoid you. Oh, I noticed, Billy answered. I'm just ignoring it. The smirk she had grown accustomed to appeared immediately. Billy did love the sound of his own voice and clearly amused himself regularly with it. Why don't you take the hint? She questioned as she strolled through the tall grass that marked the outskirts of the ranch. Why would I when I'm finally getting through? What? Marin replied quickly. What do you mean that you're getting through? You aren't getting through anything. But I am, he replied. I'm getting to you. I know it. Don't even try to deny it. I can see the acknowledgement in your eyes. Her gaze shifted immediately. Her eyes? What could he possibly see in her eyes? There was nothing to see. There you go. So easy to read, Billy commented as he stepped in front of her and blocked her path. You try to hide, but anyone with half a brain could see right through you, Maren. You wear your heart on your sleeve. She didn't know what to say. His candor had taken her by surprise. No one had ever said such things to her before, and she wasn't sure how to take it. Why are you doing this? He shrugged. I can't help it. I like you. But why? She blurted. Why would he like her? Didn't he know how foolish she'd been? Laughter filled the air as Billy threw his head back. Why wouldn't I, is the better question. His behavior made no sense to her. Still, she answered him. Haven't you heard the stories in town? What stories? The stories about me, she insisted. His dark eyes met hers and held them. What do I care what a bunch of people who don't know you say? I've met you. I know better, he answered. He held out his hand to her and Maren looked at it. Should she take it? What was there in a hand? Nothing to most, but in Maren's mind, there was far too much in the gesture. No one had ever held her hand except her sister. Elise had led her for her entire life and, despite the kindness of this man's words, Maren wasn't prepared to put her hand in his. She shifted her weight and resumed her stroll. You won't take my hand? Billy asked. She shook her head. I don't mean any offense. I just don't know you well enough, she answered, shifting her eyes to look at where he walked beside her. I hope you'll take the chance to know me, he continued. I promise you won't forget it. Nor regret it. His smile was gentle as he spoke, and Maren sensed there was truth in his words. Lord, what should I do? Her mind questioned many things as she continued to walk beside him. Could she trust Billy? Was he really all he appeared to be, or was there something dark lurking underneath? She didn't know. Before, she would have been eager to think the best of him or any man, but after encountering the likes of Felix and Briggs, who had initially seemed fine though a bit rough, she no longer trusted her own judgment. You don't believe me, do you? Billy questioned, and she wondered what in her eyes had given her away. I'm not sure, she answered honestly. They stood looking at each other, each trying to read the other's expression as unasked questions lingered between them. They might have stayed there if it weren't for the sound of an approaching horse racing in their direction. Maren's brow furrowed as the sound of hooves thundered towards them. The rider was pushing the horse to its limit. Billy, do you know who that is? She asked as concern began to creep into her voice. I can't tell, he admitted. But they sure are asking everything from that horse. Maren's heart sped up as Billy retrieved his gun and looked toward her. Just in case, he said gently. Don't you worry. The rider continued coming, his direction never faltering as he made his way toward the ranch. Finally, when he was only a few feet away, Maren could make out his appearance. His head was lowered against the sun, his shoulder-length dark hair was tossed in the wind as he stared straight ahead. Maren thought he would have plowed right through them, but he pulled up at the last minute and sitting astride his horse, he glanced down at them. I'm looking for Hamilton Barber, the stranger stated, breathlessly. And who might you be, stranger? Billy questioned. The man laughed. You're the stranger, if you don't know who I am. I don't think I get your meaning, Billy answered. It means you've only been around here as long as I've been gone. The stranger frowned. And it hasn't been all that long. Clearly, Billy wasn't amused by the man's antics. Maren watched the exchange quietly, her eyes hovering between the stranger's casual perch and Billy's ready finger. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Ned Rogers. Now that that's out the way, where's Hamilton? The name struck Maren as if a bolt of lightning had just fired from the sky. Ned Rogers, she blurted. Yes, he asked as his eyes turned to her. The moment he looked at her, his brow furrowed and he seemed to pull back in his saddle. He remembered, his smile confirmed it. Maren's former mail-order fiancé was back, but why? Chapter 5. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The moment the redhead had come into view, Ned's eyes had locked onto her. He'd ridden straight toward her as if she were some kind of magnet pulling him in. He never thought it would be her. He wasn't sure she would have stayed in Hidden Creek after all this time, especially after all that had happened, but it seemed she had. It could be another woman to be found on the ranch, but by her look, she was of the right age. It had to be her. Maren. Maren was more beautiful than he could have imagined. Her dainty features and the thick rope of hair that fell over her shoulder to her small waist made a stunning picture as the sun illuminated it like fire against the horizon. She was a fiercely stunning woman as he looked down at her from his horse. Ned had never seen her equal and did his best to focus his attention on the young man while surreptitiously studying her. The sound of her voice was melodic as she said his name, and there was no ignoring it. It demanded his attention. He stared at her, unable to speak. Her story had made its way to Bledmington. The story of a girl who'd come to marry but had run away to follow her missing fiancé. The girl who found herself in trouble. Some colored it more vibrantly than Ned believed true, but there were far too many similarities in the stories not to believe that some part of it wasn't fact. Ned had tried to believe it couldn't be her, but deep inside he knew it was. He'd wanted to come back then, to find Maren and make amends. It was his fault, after all. He'd abandoned her when he'd promised to care for her. Abandoned her before even meeting her. Shame, however, wouldn't allow him to humble himself, so he had told himself that Maren wouldn't have stayed after all she'd gone through. She would have gone back home to the East Coast, to what she knew. She would have moved on, and she would be happier for it. But evidently, he was wrong. His eyes continued to drink her in. Maren was tall, just like she described during their correspondence. Standing beside the ranch hand, she was only a few inches shorter. How old was she now? 18? No, she might be almost 19. Her figure belied her age. It was more comely than most who were older than she was. It was strange, Ned had concocted a picture of Maren in his head, one that had changed over his travels as he encountered one redhead after another, wondering if her hair was the same color, or whether she had freckles. The image in his head had many variables that changed with inspiration and his imagination, but Maren herself was far beyond anything he ever could have considered. How much had she suffered? The question was one that had haunted him during all these weeks and months. Had she experienced the horrible things people had said, or was it just gossip to keep the bored citizens entertained? The thought gave him pause as some of the contents of the tales he'd heard came to mind. Stories of horrible acts and pain. There were rumors of her joining up with a traveling show that specialized in showcasing women and worse. He looked Maren over. She didn't appear to be the kind who'd act so loosely. Nor would he have guessed so from the letters they had shared, but a lot had happened since then. He scolded himself for the fleeting thought. Maren was a good woman. He was sure of that. Whatever had happened to her was not by her design. Again, it all came back to him. It was his fault. He hadn't been there as he had promised to be. His manners returned to him as he realized she was shifting uncomfortably under his gaze. "Beg your pardon," he said with a nod and proceeded to slide from the saddle. The other man watched him carefully, but Ned ignored him. Whoever he was, he had no idea of the history between himself and Maren. But then, what did it matter if some ranch hand knew? Who was he to care? Still, the two of them had been taking a walk together amongst the grass. What was he doing? Ned caught himself in mid-thought. His mind was behaving like a territorial man, but hadn't he been the one to leave Maren alone? What right had he to question whom she walked with? She wasn't his fiancée any longer. He'd thrust her aside. She had probably done the same, and it would have been right for her to do so, too. After all, it was pure ego to think she'd be waiting for him for all this time. He couldn't blame her for finding someone else if that were the case. His heart sank at the thought, but nonetheless, he extended a hand in greeting as he spoke. "And who might you be?" he asked her hesitantly, unsure of whether she would want their previous acquaintance known to the man she was with. If he was a suitor, He may be unaware of the reason Marin had come to Hidden Creek in the first place, and she may want to keep it that way. Caution was best. He would allow her manner to dictate his own. It was no surprise that Marin didn't take his hand. Still, Ned let it linger there several moments in the hopes that she might. "What are you doing here?" she questioned, still refusing his feeble pleasantry. Her eyes were locked on his, beautiful light brown eyes full of feeling. What he saw hurt him, but he couldn't stop looking. "I needed to see Hamilton," he answered and pulled his hand back into place by his side. "You know this guy?" the young man finally interrupted. He had been watching the exchange between them cautiously, and if Ned wasn't mistaken, he seemed to have a bit of edge about him. He was younger than Ned, that was sure, and he was smaller in build with barely a hair on his chin compared to Ned's neatly trimmed stubble that outlined his jaw. "I thought I did," Marin answered, and the words were like a knife in his gut, but he deserved it. "What does that mean?" the young man continued to question. "Nothing, Billy," she responded, her eyes moving from Ned's to his. Ned wanted her to look back at him. And he wanted to see what was in her eyes when she looked at that other man. Again his mind was wandering to things it shouldn't. "Billy, is it? Is Hamilton here or not? It's really important that I speak with him." Ned took the liberty of changing the subject. Marin clearly hadn't told Billy of his existence, and it seemed she wanted to keep it that way. He could honor her decision. Billy's face was full of distrust, but nonetheless, he answered Ned's question. "He's up at the house." "Good," Ned said and gave Marin another look before swinging his leg up and over the back of his horse and settling into the saddle. She looked up at him, and Ned couldn't help the repressed regret. It had been a constant companion, but he'd never felt it more keenly than now. He had made a mistake. How big he wasn't sure he could ever quantify, but there was one thing he knew as he looked into the eyes of the young woman who was looking back at him. Marin shared his feelings, though hers were for an entirely different reason. And there was anger that burned on the outskirts of her gaze. Justified anger and surprise. "God, I pray one day she'll forgive me wronging her. I pray for the strength to tell her how sorry I am." Ned allowed himself a small gesture, nodding to her before he knocked his heels against his horse's side and raced toward the ranch. He had an appointment, one that was long in the making, and it was time for him to face the music of the life he'd left behind when his brother John had died. It was time for Ned Rogers to come home. Chapter 6. A haze had fallen over the ranch and everyone's eyes seemed to linger on Marin no matter where she turned. She knew why, though she tried to pretend she didn't, but it was obvious. Everyone wondered how she was handling the fact that Ned had come back to Hidden Creek. The town was elated with the return of its prodigal son, but Marin didn't share their sentiment. Ned had abandoned her, left her without even meeting her after months of confessing his love and intentions. When the test of his words had come, Ned had failed, and with it, all of Marin's hopes and dreams for her future had vanished. "I don't see why everyone is so happy," Elise complained as she plucked the laundry from the line. She had just been told about the party Widow Klein was throwing to welcome Ned home. Hamilton sighed. "I know Ned isn't your favorite person, but he and John were always good to the people of this town." "Good to them or not, I have reason not to share their sentiment," Elise interjected as her head snapped around to look at her husband, daring him to say contrary. Marin's brother-in-law knew well the wife he'd married and smirked at her response. "Yes, with good cause, but it doesn't change the fact that when Ned and John were here they were valuable and vital parts of this community. The fact that Ned is back and ready to reclaim his land and start over is a good thing. We need more men like Ned around." "I don't agree," Elise replied. "Hidden Creek needs men of character, and from what I have seen of Ned, he doesn't have much of that. I still don't know why you gave the land back to him. You could have used it to extend your holdings." "The land was never mine, and I never intended to use it. I had hoped Ned would come back and make of it what he and John had planned," Hamilton answered as he stood from where he'd been repairing the cart's broken wheel. "I'm glad I was right. Must we go?" Elise huffed petulantly. "No, we don't have to, but I'd very much like to. Ned was a good friend. He may have done wrong by you and Marin, but he has never been anything but a solid man to me, and I for one am willing to do as the Bible says and forgive." Hamilton's comments silenced Ailey's. Maren had stayed out of the conversation. The day was hot, and she was too tired to argue Ned Rogers' virtues or villainies, but hearing Hamilton speak so highly of him made it even more unbearable. Forgiveness, there was a concept easier said than done. Maren had been trying to move on from the events of the past, but it was difficult. She'd been hurt and disappointed so much that it was almost impossible for her not to think of it. Only Billy seemed to help. His kind nature and persistence were once annoying, but had become wonderful over the last days. Then Ned came back. Ned's return had changed a lot of things, including the amount of time she spent with Billy. It felt wrong. She couldn't explain it, but the fact that Ned was there, the man whom she had once intended to marry, made spending time alone with Billy seem inappropriate. It was ridiculous, of course. Ned had no claim on her anymore, and neither did she have claim to him. He had ended everything when he'd left Hidden Creek. Why should she be the one to suffer more for his choices? But then, why couldn't she shake this ridiculous feeling? "I'm going for a walk," Maren announced as she dropped the last of the shirts into the basket that sat at Ailey's feet. Ailey turned to her. "I can come with you if you want. We haven't walked together in a while." Maren appreciated the sentiment, but she needed time alone. She needed to think, pray, and decide how she was to handle this. There seemed to be so much ahead of her, but she had no idea which direction to go. "Thank you, Ailey, but I'd rather walk on my own this time," she said with a warm smile, hoping to assure her sister that she was all right. "Enjoy your walk," Hamilton commented as he walked towards Ailey's. Maren wandered under the bright sun. There were chores to be done, but she was sure Ailey's would handle them alone, at least this once. Hidden Creek was so beautiful, and Maren had come to appreciate her home in the West more and more every day since she'd returned from her disastrous experience. The day was hot, but the breeze that rolled off the hills was cooling, and Maren allowed the feel of it against her cheek to drive the direction of her feet. She closed her eyes as she stood to face the nearby creek. In the Bible, David would sit upon hilltops and talk to the Lord. It was something she found herself doing more and more every day, and every day she felt more and more of his peace. So why was she crying? Maren raised her hands to her cheeks as her tears began to fall freely. What was this? She didn't understand. Why would she be crying? She lowered herself onto the tall grass beneath the shade of a large sycamore. The creek was sparking in the white light as the sun reflected off its surface. "Why, God?" she asked, as her emotions began to melt and all the feelings she'd held in began to rise to the surface. Her cries wafted away on the breeze. Her heart was filled with so much disappointment and pain. She thought she had gotten past it, but it was still there, hiding somewhere deep inside her. The frost of the emotional numbing was melting, and now it was all coming out. It wasn't until she saw him that she realized how much Ned had hurt her, and in the past week since he'd returned, his constant praise and everyone's fond memories of him made her remember everything she'd fallen in love with in the first place. "Turn yourself to me, and have mercy on me, for I am desolate and afflicted," she recited quietly. Psalm 25, a voice replied from behind her. Immediately, Maren began to wipe her cheeks. She didn't want anyone seeing her like that. She didn't need more people hovering and worrying. She didn't need more pity because of her past. "Maren," the voice continued, and she turned to answer. The moment she saw him, her breath caught. "Ned," she said softly as she pushed herself to her feet. "What are you doing here?" "This is my land," he replied with a warm smile. "I should be asking you that question, don't you think?" "Your land?" she questioned. She looked around her. She hadn't wandered anywhere unfamiliar, it was the same place that had given her peace since her arrival. "This is Hamilton's land," she replied. "It was," Ned corrected. "Until he gave it back to me. Everything from that small hillock. The 60 acres to the south belonged to me." Maren didn't know how to answer. All the things that had been taken from her, and now her place of peace was being stolen, too? She balled her hands into fists. She took a deep breath to calm herself, but she didn't wait for the exhalation. She fled from Ned and the hill and her peace and everything she had hoped to find there. But Ned easily caught up with her. "You're upset," he said, as he gently grasped her arm, stopping her. Maren yanked away from him. "Don't touch me." "I'm sorry." Ned's hand dropped away. "I just wanted to know if there was anything I could do to help." "There is," she said, squaring her shoulders. "Leave Hidden Creek and never come back." "Is that really how you feel?" he asked. She hated his soft tone. "Yes," she snapped. "I was getting by just fine before you came back." "I'm sure you were, Maren, and I'm sorry for taking that from you, but I had to come home." "I was gone long enough," he said frankly. "I made a promise to my brother, and I have to keep it. I won't be any kind of man if I don't." "You aren't any kind of man now," she retorted. "How can you just come back and expect everything to be fine?" Her words were meant to hurt. They were meant to cut him as deeply as he had cut her. Yet even in her anger, he remained calm. His voice was even and yielding as he replied. "You're right. Everything is not fine, but it's going to be." The way he looked at her made her heart hurt. She couldn't take this anymore. Maren bolted, leaving him staring at her back. Chapter 7. Strange things were happening. "What do you mean, they're missing?" Hamilton bellowed. "That's 2 new plows. How could they just disappear?" He'd repeated the question 4 times now, but no matter how many times or how many ways he asked, Billy's reply was the same. "I don't know, Hamilton. I locked them up just as you asked. I swear. I don't know where they could have gotten to. Even if you didn't lock them, who would take them? There's no one around for miles." "There's Ned," Billy replied quickly. Everyone turned in his direction. "Ned?" Hamilton repeated, surprised, then shook his head. "Ned wouldn't do something like that." "How do you know?" Billy countered. "Because I know him. I've known him a lot longer than I've known you, and I'm telling you, he wouldn't do something like this. Ned is no thief." Maren wondered at his certainty. The things Ned had stolen from her were far more valuable than a couple of plows, but she wasn't about to bring that up. "Then they have to be here somewhere," she offered. "Plows don't just walk off." "Precisely," Elise agreed. She was sewing the buttons back onto one of Hamilton's shirts after he'd snagged himself on a stray branch a few days before. "You're just looking in the wrong place," Maren continued. "I've looked everywhere," Billy insisted. "I'm telling you, as the Lord is my witness, they ain't on this ranch. I don't know where they are or who took them, but I am telling you that I am 100% sure, they ain't here. First, a horse goes missing. A bunch of my cattle take sick, and now 2 plows just disappear." Hamilton itemized the mysterious occurrences on his fingers. "What's going on?" "I don't know, but none of this can be accidental. Someone's plotting against you, Hamilton, and we need to find out who." There was something in Billy's voice that made Maren's blood run cold. Plotting against him? Who would plot against Hamilton? And why? Could it be Ned? She wanted to tell herself yes, it would be easier to add some other reason to dislike him, but it simply didn't ring true. Ned had spoken well of Hamilton the day they met on the hilltop. Her brother-in-law had even given Ned back the property he'd taken from him. 60 acres was no trifle. So, in her mind, there was no way it was Ned. The night came quickly, too quickly, and Maren soon found herself alone in her room with her thoughts, a very uncomfortable place to be. The moon was full, and the soft light from it filled her room through the open window. She liked looking at the moon. Recently, she used it as a symbol for God, something to look at since she couldn't see his face. It was his creation, and it was almost as if it were his loving eye watching over her. Maren laughed at her own silly reference. God was there, somewhere, and though she couldn't see him, her faith in him had grown with time. It didn't matter if she could see him or not, all she needed to know was that he loved her and would never leave her. He had saved her from Felix. He would be there for her now. The disturbed bellows of cattle distracted her. "What are they getting up to?" she wondered aloud as she moved toward the window. The grounds were quiet, but there was something strange about the barn. It was glowing, but it wasn't from the soft blue of the moon, but from a rising yellow tinged with orange and red. Her eyes grew wide. "Fire!" she screamed. Marin's bare feet slapped the wooden floors as she raced across the room as one thought filled her mind. "Billy!" she screamed. The young man's bed was in the barn. The fire could only mean tragedy for him. She yanked the door open and ran out. "Hamilton, fire! Elise, wake up!" she screeched. She pounding feverishly the moment she reached their door. The door to their room flew open and a moment later Hamilton was bounding past her for the stairs. "Marin!" Elise called frantically as she emerged from within. "Fire? Where?" "The barn's on fire." They both ran after Hamilton. "Billy's in there." By the time they reached the barn, the flames were licking the night sky. "Water!" Hamilton yelled as he attempted to stamp out what embers fell as parts of the roof ignited, but he was outmatched. Billy, thankfully, was by his side, doing his best to stop the fire. His clothes were already black with soot. "Their buckets behind the house," Elise hollered as she grabbed Marin's hand and they raced to retrieve them. This couldn't be happening, Marin thought. But Billy was all right, that much was clear. But how had this happened? Fear filled her heart. She and Elise rounded the corner of the house together, but it was she who spied the buckets first. She grabbed hold and swung one to her sister. The last two she grabbed herself and they raced to the pump to fill them. Elise was already on her way. Her heart had never beat so fast in her life. Even when she'd been held against her will, she'd never been so scared. Losing the barn, the animals, and maybe even one of the people she loved. She couldn't let it happen. Elise pumped while Marin filled, then Billy raced to dump the water on the flames. It was no use. They needed more hands. The sound of a whinnying horse got all of their attention. Hamilton had raced inside and was dragging her out. "Hamilton!" Elise screamed. "Keep the water coming," Billy ordered. "He's all right." "Keep the water coming." Marin didn't know what possessed her. What she was about to do didn't make any sense, but there was something inside her urging her like nothing she'd felt since her return. She had to help the horses. Hamilton couldn't get to all of them soon enough. They were trapped. She had to help. She raced to the barn door and rushed into the smoke. Instantly, her lungs burned as they filled with smoke and she coughed, holding her hand to her face. She tried to see as her eyes stung. She fought her way to the horses. Hamilton was screaming at her, but she kept on. "Come on," she yelled as she tugged at the latch that kept more of them caged. The two horses paced back and forth frantically, their large eyes revealing their panic. She had to get them out of there. She had to save them and herself in the process. "Move," a harsh voice demanded as she was pushed aside. Marin coughed and stumbled away from the latch. She saw the man who was now working on getting the stall open. Ned. In no time, he had the latch off and the horses raced toward their freedom as the smoke thickened around them. She coughed harder, the stifling smoke making it hard to see, hard to breathe. "Get out of here, Marin," Ned demanded. He grabbed her by the hand and yanked her behind him as he raced for the door. She closed her hand around his as they ran. They were almost there when a bout of coughing racked through her, stopping her movement. It was too hard to breathe. She couldn't get air. She couldn't. Ned was only a few steps away when a loud cracking sound filled her ears. Marin looked up and screamed as the engulfed roof gave way above them. Chapter 8. Something heavy sat on top of her as heat encircled her from every direction. She could hear the sound of voices, some of them she recognized, but most a blur. The sound of something flapping surrounded her and with every strike, her body was pressed upon. She couldn't breathe. The weight was too heavy. And then she was being dragged. Dragged away from the worst of the heat. "Get it off," she groaned. She barely heard her own words above the crackle of flames and the frantic voices that surrounded her. Get him off her. She heard Billy's urgent demand, and a moment later the weight which had pressed her down was lifted. In her confusion, it took a moment for Maren to realize the source. It hadn't been a thing on top of her or some fragment of the roof which had pinned her to the ground. It had been Ned. Maren took a deep breath as oxygen surged into her lungs. Her chest roared, and her head ached. I've got her. Billy's voice resonated again, and suddenly she was swept up into strong arms that rushed her further from the burning building. Her head lolled against his chest, her vision blurred as they raced from the orange-tinted night. Her vision went in and out as she tried to focus, but it was no use. Her head was spinning, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get her eyes to obey her. She coughed again, pain making her breath short. She barely caught a glimpse of Ned, his body slumped over Hamilton's shoulder as Ailese ran beside her husband. Billy deposited her on the grass near the house. Hamilton laid Ned beside her before they both returned to fight the flames. They worked to keep the fire from leaping to the house and consuming that, too. God, have mercy, Ailese wept as she hovered over Maren. Something dripped into Maren's eyes, and she reached to brush it away, but Ailese stopped her. Lie still. You hit your head. Ned? Maren croaked out, but there was no answer. He hadn't moved since Hamilton had placed him beside her. Was he even breathing? Ailese, he's not moving, she eked out. Close your eyes. Ned will be all right, her sister assured her, but the look on her face, though barely recognizable in the flickering darkness, gave Maren no comfort. Maren wanted to draw closer to Ned, but her body felt like lead. She couldn't move an inch. I said, stay still, Ailese instructed. I'll look after Ned. Maren closed her eyes and the heaviness in her body took over. She just needed a minute, and she'd be fine. Just a minute, and then she'd check on Ned herself. Just a minute. Her head still ached, but her vision was clear again. Days after the fire devoured the barn, Maren and Ned were both cloistered in the same sick room. Hamilton and Ailese had given up their bedroom, which was the larger and could accommodate 2 beds, to cater to the doctor's recommendations for a clean, quiet place for them to heal. Maren had a slight concussion and minor burns from the incident, but Ned had suffered the worst of it. Shielding her with his body, he had put himself between her and the falling debris. He'd received a solid blow to the head from a beam and burns scarred his once unblemished back. Hamilton had determined that the fire had probably been started by a lantern that had been left lit in the barn. Of course, there was no way he could be sure, but he wanted to believe that it hadn't been part of some horrendous plot. However, the missing plows and horse still hovered heavily in everyone's minds. Maren knew that Hamilton had gone to the sheriff, but nothing had been determined. Maren stared over at Ned on the other bed, watching as he continued his fitful sleep. The infection had set in a few days ago, despite the doctor's best efforts to keep the wounds clean and their efforts to keep Ned comfortable. The fever had started soon after. Ailese had wanted to care for him, but Maren had insisted she be allowed to do it. By then, she was able to function better. Besides, it was because of her that he was injured. He'd rushed in after her when her foolish heart had driven her to save the horses. It was his good heart that had tried to protect her from even worse injury. Caring for him was the least she could do. She hovered over his bed and dabbed his damp brow with a cool cloth to try to ease the fever. Ned flinched beneath the cold compress and murmured something in his fitful rest. Must protect. His mumbled words caught Maren's attention. Protect what or whom? Her. She brushed the dark damp strands from his head and looked on the face she had dreamed of seeing for months before her arrival in Hidden Creek. Her fingers were tempted to stroke the ridge of his straight nose, but she restrained them. Even in caring for him, that wouldn't be appropriate. Still, the contours of his face intrigued her. Forgive me, Ned suddenly cried as tears rolled down his cheeks and his body began to shake. It's all my fault. Hush, Maren urged. Be still. All is well, Ned. Maren? The sound of her murmured name caused her to pause. Did he know she was there or had some fever dream confounded him? She was unsure whether to leave him be or remain, but something held her fast. "I'm here, Ned," she said gently as she continued to minister to his brow. "I'm well." "Left her." "Shouldn't have left her," he continued in his fevered state as Marin listened. "It's all right, Ned. You came back." "It's all right," she assured him, but he wasn't hearing her. The fever had his mind, and when his eyes finally snapped open, they stared glassily at her. "She'll never forgive me," he rasped. "Never." He clutched her wrist as she held the cloth to his brow, the intensity of his eyes almost alarming. Marin looked at his pained expression. He had never asked her to forgive him, yet absolution was what he craved. Could she give it to him? Could she put away her anger and hurt and allow her heart to forgive? "And forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors." Her father's voice echoed in her mind. It had been a long time since she'd had cause to think of him, but now as she sat with Ned, she heard him recite the Lord's Prayer as clear as day. He had always admonished them to forgive, though warned that it was not an easy task to complete. The forgiveness from God required one's willingness to forgive others. "Forgive me?" Once again Ned's urgent words filled her ears and moved her. Holding onto his hand gently, she pried his grip loose from her arm. "I forgive you," she whispered. "I forgive you, Ned." He stilled beside her, his eyes shimmering and unfocused as they looked at her. He smiled as sweat poured from his brow. "Marin?" "Yes," she answered. Had the fever finally broken? Had his senses returned? She gazed at him hopefully, then without a word, his hand reached up to her head and pulled her to him. The action was so quick yet gentle that Marin had no chance to respond, as Ned's lips met hers for the first time. She stared unblinkingly, surprise robbing her of her ability to move as his lips pressed against hers and then fell away. His eyes closed and again, his body flinched fretfully. Marin sat there long after he ceased to stir. Her fingers played at her lips where Ned had left his mark. They tingled and her heart raced in her chest as she savored the act over and over again in her head. What did it mean? Did Ned Rogers still care for her? Better still, did she care for him? Chapter 9. The weeks of his recovery had been long ones, full of pain and discomfort. The pain was easy enough to bear, given the reason for it. Ned would endure the same and more again if it meant Marin would be spared the worst of it. And there was another upside to his injury. It meant for those weeks he'd enjoyed the sight of Marin daily, and every day she grew more beautiful than the day before. It was blissful torture to have her so close and yet at such a distance. He didn't know the reason for it, but Marin, though she cared for him and her manner toward him had improved, kept a distance he could not understand. It seemed even greater than the one that had existed before. Ned couldn't comprehend it, but he couldn't question it either. He had no right. He was thankful just to be near her. He didn't deserve it, but it seemed God had found it fit to give him some consolation for the error he'd made. That day, he'd made the agonizing trip outside again, after weeks of being cooped up in the bedroom. "Can I give you a hand?" Ned asked as he watched Marin going about her work. She had such a look of determination on her face for so small a task. Her eyes were focused, barely blinking as the clothes she collected fell into the basket at her feet. He wondered what she was thinking, but the moment his voice reached her, all seemed to leave her mind and the shirt she was collecting missed the basket and fell to the ground. "What are you doing out of bed?" she scolded him, stooping quickly to retrieve the runaway garment. "I can't stay in bed all day," he mused. "It's not my nature. Besides, I've been in bed for weeks. I'll go mad if I have to stay closed up any longer." He moved closer, his faltering steps measured. "Will you be returning home soon then?" Marin asked, though her eyes' focus remained elsewhere. "I'm sure there is a lot that has fallen to the wayside." "As soon as Doc says I can," Ned replied. "I expect that will be any day now." "Is that so?" Marin replied, finally looking at him as a pregnant silence passed between them. "Your injuries no longer trouble you?" "I can manage," he answered. Her verbal concern may not have been much, but it was more than he'd received from her in the weeks since he'd returned to himself. Though his injuries were still worrisome, a fault of the lack of movement he was sure, the pain was considerably less and would vanish altogether if he were allowed to do more. Ned was not a man to sit idle for long. Then your return home will be a good thing, Marin continued. You will be able to return to that which makes you happiest. The cadence of her voice was even as she spoke, but even in its rhythm, Ned noted a hint of melancholy. Did his pending departure bring her some grief? It was silly to hope so, but Ned found himself to be a fool when it came to Marin. Her hand was holding onto the line where she'd been plucking a pin, and he reached up and covered it with his own. Will you be happy to see me go? He asked gently, his eyes fixed on the brown depths of her eyes as she blinked rapidly at his question. Of course, she answered after a moment. I wish you the best. As I do you, Marin. It is all I have ever wanted. Her eyes glistened and wavered in their focus. At that moment, Ned would have wished for nothing more than to be able to read her mind and know her thoughts. This Marin was different from the woman he had courted by letter. Her fierce, bold spirit had vanished, and a more sober and quiet woman had emerged. It was by no means a detraction, but the maturity of her nature had brought with it a mystery that had been lacking before. Marin had once poured out her very self onto the page for him to read, but now everything was veiled, her eyes the only sign of her feelings, and even they proved difficult to read. I haven't had the opportunity to thank you, he said, sliding his hand from hers as he removed the peg from its place and then the other, dropping the garment it held into the basket. What for? You cared for me. I know that must have been difficult for you, being injured yourself, he said as he continued to assist her. You were in much greater need than I. My injuries were nothing in comparison. Besides, you were hurt because of me. I was in your debt. Caring for you was the least I could do. So you nursed me out of obligation? Yes. I mean, no. I did it because you needed to be cared for. Marin appeared flustered. Elise could have done it. Yes, she could have, Marin answered. She wanted to. Then why didn't you let her? He continued to question her, knowing he was crossing into a territory he might not like. It wasn't for her to do, Marin replied. She gathered another item from the line and placed it in the basket. Why not? She stopped and looked at him squarely. Because I wanted to do it. Elise has her husband to care for. It was only right that I care for you. Again, obligation. I must have truly been a burden to you. It was not out of obligation, but if you wish to see it that way, she replied. A small pout plagued her lips. Ned found it amusing. I wish to know it for what it was, Ned answered. What would you have me say? Her eyes locked on his. The question struck him. What was he hoping for? Was he hoping for some confession of love? Some hope that maybe Marin still felt for him as she once did? The way he felt about her? The only thing I've ever wanted to hear from you, he replied. The truth. Marin's expression stilled and confusion slowly crept across her face. I don't know what that is anymore. What do you know? He questioned, a glimmer of hope sparking in his chest. I'm confused, and there seems to be no end of it. He stepped toward her carefully, his eyes never leaving hers as he attempted to wipe away the world for just a moment and have her entirely to himself. What confuses you? Myself, she answered. How I feel. How you feel. How she felt was something he was very interested in, but to hear of her confusion was somewhat discouraging to him, though he was more curious if he were honest with himself. I'm not sure, she began but stopped as if she thought better of whatever it was she was about to say. Marin, you can talk to me, he insisted. I know that I have done things that brought you pain, things that hurt you, but I swear it was never my intention to harm you in any way. I only ever wanted what was best for you. I know. No, you don't. He stepped closer and a look of alarm flashed across Marin's face and made him stop in his tracks. I'm sorry that I left. I thought I was doing what was best. I was in no position to marry, he admitted. John was dead and in my mind, I didn't think I could handle being a husband. It was John who always encouraged me. He made me feel as if I could do anything. Without him, I was temporarily lost. Maren listened as he spoke, her gaze never faltering, and Ned allowed the full weight of his feelings to peel away from him layer by layer. My brother was always there for me. I thought I needed him and his guidance. His instruction. And now? Maren questioned. Now, I realize that the only person I have ever needed is God, and that for my failings He is willing to forgive me. My only concern was whether you could. Maren remained silent. I'm sorry, Maren, Ned confessed. I'm sorry I could not have been the man you came here for. The man you deserved. That's the thing, Maren answered as tears filled her eyes. You are who I thought you were. It is me who is no longer the girl I was and can never be again. What are you saying? I'm saying that you are a good man, Ned Rogers. I wish you weren't, it would make things easier, but you are. Make what easier? Because then I could forget what I feel toward you and be content on my own, she admitted. I don't want you to be on your own, Ned countered gently as boldness filled him and moved him closer. I don't know how not to be anymore, she confessed. Yet it scares me at the same time. I can't find where I belong. Ned took another step toward her, his hand reaching up to her cheek. His thumb strummed gently against her soft skin. Let me in again. I know I don't deserve it, and I should probably never ask, but I am asking. Rings of emotion filled him as he cupped her small face in his hands and looked down at her. Start over with me. Find your place in my heart. Chapter 10. Maren had never been lost in someone's eyes before, but Ned's were so full, it seemed as if the entire world were locked behind them. Where Billy had been a comfort, a distraction from her loneliness, Ned's presence was a hook dragging her toward the surface. She couldn't deny that the love she had for him, though suppressed, had never waned. His return had only made it blossom once more. Take me away from here. The words were uttered before Maren had given them thought. Where would you go? Ned asked, his hand still on her cheek. Anywhere, but I can no longer live under the Barber roof. I can no longer be the child I was and still am in my sister's eyes. I have to take the step and move forward in faith, believing in the only things I can. What's that? Ned asked. The plan that God has for me, the journey He led me on that brought me to Hidden Creek in the first place. He has always had a plan for you, Maren, whether you realized it or not. His eyes have always been upon you, Ned answered, a hopeful smile lighting up his face. I have come to understand that my reliance on my sister has prevented me from relying on Him and trusting Him. I can't live my life that way any longer. Elise needs to be set free, and so do I, free to walk the path meant for me. Are you sure? I have spent the past weeks praying about it, trying to focus my mind on Him and not on anything else, she replied. I needed an answer. Was that why you avoided me? No. I avoided you because of what happened between us and the way it made me feel. Ned's brow furrowed. You mean my leaving you? No, Maren answered. I mean you kissed me. The night your fever broke, you apologized for having left me and then you kissed me. He blinked rapidly in confusion. I don't remember it. I know. You were overcome with fever, but I was not. I couldn't get it out of my head for days. I prayed all the time. I asked God to explain why I should feel affection toward you when you abandoned me. Maren. Let me finish. I wanted to be angry with you. It was easier to blame what happened to me on you, but it wasn't your choice that put me in harm's way. It was mine. I tried to convince myself that all I'd learned about you was false, a ruse to draw me in, but when you returned, everything I knew of you was proven true. People everywhere praised you, and it was no longer for what you'd done in the past, but what you were doing now. She sighed. Then you were hurt trying to save me, and watching over you made me realize that I still have feelings for you. That the care and concern I gave to you was because my feelings were still what they had been before. I just wasn't sure if it was wise to feel them. Ned watched her carefully, his eyes focused on her tenderly as Maren explained herself. It felt as if a great weight was lifted from her chest as she uttered each word. All she wanted was to relieve herself of the burden. How do you feel about everything now? I'm at peace. What happened is over. If I want to live a full life, I must let go of it. All of it. I have to forgive you, Ned. I already did, though you don't remember. I forgave you that same night, and from this day, I won't think of it any longer. What's past is past. Amen, he replied, closing his eyes momentarily. Amen, Marin echoed, as a small smile graced her lips. There is something I must ask you, Ned stated. I have to ask it now before anything else is said. I need to know. Anything, she replied quietly. If I asked you to marry me again, would you accept me? Marin's smile broadened. Are you asking? I'm asking. Will you marry me, Marin Keefe? Would you honor me even with all my faults and failings? Will you make me the happiest of men by being my bride? Hearing the words spoken sent a thrill up Marin's spine, but more shocking was the peace which followed. Absolute stillness. There was no worry, no fear, or reservation as she spoke. But I have faults of my own, she said. Could you live with them? I have accepted all of you, Marin. Your faults make no difference to me. Then, yes, Ned. My answer is yes. The room was silent as Hamilton, Elise, and Billy looked at them. Marin's heart, though light, was pained by the expression on the face of the young man who stood across from her. She almost wished Billy hadn't been there when she and Ned went to share their news. But he'd have to be told sometime. She knew it had been Billy's desire to make her his wife. He was a good man, strong and determined, with a sense of humor that would make the most melancholy of people smile with joy. Still, despite all of his good traits, her heart was not his. Her heart belonged to the man she now stood beside, her hand clasped in his. Are you sure about this? Hamilton questioned. His arms were folded over his chest as he stared at them. I am, Ned answered. As am I, Marin confirmed. Marin, Elise interjected, how can you be sure of him? He left you once. What says he won't do it again? Her sister's words were not meant to malign but were out of concern, Marin knew. Because I say I won't, Ned replied before Marin had the opportunity. I was a different man then. I've grown up. And you? Elise asked, turning her gaze to Marin. I've grown up as well. When I came to Hidden Creek, I was an idealistic girl living in the protective shadow of a much-beloved sister. Now, I am a woman, ready to set out on my own adventure, on my own path of life with the man I believe God has sent for me. How can you be sure? Why couldn't another be the one sent for you? Billy interrupted, a scowl on his face. Marin looked at Ned and then to Billy, her hand closing around Ned's more securely. Because I've prayed about it and the answer is always the same. My heart returns to the one who brought me here, to Ned. She released her fiancé's hand and crossed the small space that lay between her and Billy. There is someone for you, Billy. I know it. Some woman who is waiting for you as Ruth waited on Boaz, but I'm not her. I'm sorry for the pain this may cause, for I cherish your friendship. Friendship, he repeated as disappointment painted his features. Yes, friendship. You helped me when I was in a dark place, Billy. I will never forget that. I'm sorry that it may not be what you had hoped, but I am glad to call you a friend. Billy's face remained stoic, then he finally sighed. All right. Friendship. His eyes remained on her for a moment, before a flash of something flickered through them. I'd best be getting to my work, he announced and was gone a moment later. Marin felt sick. She had never knowingly been the cause of another person's pain. It was a feeling that hurt her as probably much as it did Billy. Then Ned's hand slipped into hers. Are you all right? She nodded. She wasn't all right yet, but she would be. Marin was sure of that. There was no veil or flowers for Marin as she stood before Reverend Murdoch. Reverend Dixon had retired a year earlier, and Reverend Murdoch had arrived to replace him. He was tall, unmarried, handsome and by all accounts, kind-hearted. The slender minister stood respectfully in the church with only Hamilton and Elise as witnesses. Hamilton had wanted to invite the rest of the Barber family, but Marin had asked him not to. She didn't want a large gathering, just enough to confirm to the world that she was indeed Ned Rogers' wife. She'd even declined the meal Ailey's had wanted to prepare. It was strange, but though she was excited to be Ned's wife, she didn't need a fanfare or the congratulations of others. She simply wanted to step into the new page of her life and see where it would take her. Reverend Murdoch began the ceremony, and Marin's heart raced as an unfaltering smile lifted her cheeks. The words she'd left New York to hear were finally uttered. "I do." Ned's voice was so sure and resolute as he uttered the words that Marin couldn't take her eyes off of him. He was smiling, like her, and in his eyes, she saw the very hope that stirred in her own heart. Today was a new day. It was a day of shedding the past and being open to the future. Marin was ready. She was ready to be the woman she knew was inside her. The days of being Ailey's little sister were over. The days of being protected and shielded were at an end. She was no longer looking to Ned for her salvation and hope or her chance at happiness. He was a part of it, true, but he wasn't her complete joy. God was. Amidst her struggles and confusion, amidst her anger and blame, she'd finally found herself. "Do you, Marin Aithne Breda Keefe, take Ned Cosgrove Rogers to be your husband in lawful matrimony?" Reverend Murdoch asked. "I do." She didn't mean to rush the words, but they flew out of her mouth so quickly that it made everyone look at her and laugh. "Sorry," she apologized as Reverend Murdoch grinned. "No need for remorse, my dear," he stated. "It's good to see a healthy enthusiasm toward marriage. After all, it is the first institution our Lord ever created and the one that most exemplifies his relationship with the Church." "Yes, Reverend. That said, I believe it's for me to continue," he mused and resumed where he'd left off. That evening, as Ned lifted her into his arms and crossed the threshold of their home, Marin felt a peace she'd never experienced before. This wasn't a stranger's house or her parents' house. It was hers. Theirs. "Welcome home, Marin," Ned whispered in her ear. Marin wound her arms more securely around his neck and pulled him close. "Thank for giving me a home," she answered and kissed him soundly. He hugged her fiercely, protectively. "Now I know for sure where I belong," she whispered, snuggling deeper into his arms. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.